episode of the podcast is brought to you by LeafWell.
Hello, Cannabinoid Connect listeners. Have you ever thought about getting a medical card? The process can be intimidating and hard to navigate. That's why I've partnered with LeafWell, the easiest and most affordable way to get a medical card in Texas and 32 other states in the U.S. LeafWell seamlessly connects you to a network of doctors that will help you get certified online in minutes. LeafWell is run by data scientists, cannabis specialists, and patient advocates that are passionate about increasing access and education around medical cannabis. LeafWell's patient support team is also there to support you throughout your entire journey using medical cannabis. As I've mentioned, I've partnered with LeafWell to provide all my listeners with a discount to become certified for medical cannabis. Simply go to their website at leafwell.com and use the promo code CCTX to receive $15 off the price of getting a medical card. LeafWell only charges you if you get approved, so what do you have to lose? Visit their website at leafwell.com today and use the promo code CCTX to get certified for medical cannabis. Risk-free. Ross Anderson, what's up, man?
Hey, brother. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's nice to meet you as well. It's always a pleasure to have a fellow Texan on the podcast. I know that regular listeners or viewers will hear me kind of gripe about how regulated and how prohibition, focused the state is when it comes to cannabis, in particularly hemp. And we can definitely jump into that. You being, of course, in the industry, the COO and Formulation Specialist at Elevated Wellness. But before we do all that, Ross, I first want to show gratitude, man. For those that are watching the podcast, not listening, I'm showing Ross some of the products that he sent me previously to try out before this episode. And I got to tell you, man, the 1-to-1 CBDA CBD tincture is incredible. You can tell it's really high quality. I feel really great after doing it, especially I actually did it today before this episode. I love the pain cream relief. It's still in the box. I've only used it a couple times for myself, my wife who had some back pain. I have not tried the 3,000 milligram CBD, the sleep aid, but I intend to do that. And lastly, the Relax, I think this is the broad spectrum CBD tincture. I think this is going to be a good stocking gift for my mother-in-law because she's THC sensitive, so that'll be great. And then the gummies, man, they're gone because I ate all the gummies. They were so good, and every night, after a podcast or if I was unwinding, I would just eat one or two of them, and it was a great experience.
I love hearing that, my man.
Yeah, so thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. We put a lot of love into those, so it's good to hear when people really enjoy them. So totally. I appreciate that, brother.
Yeah, no, of course. And, I want to kick it off because you do say you take special quality and time to, and your process of due diligence to make sure that these products are of course, harm-free and they're of high quality, but they also taste well and you get a great experience. So from what I understand, you formulate all of your name brand products in facilities that are regulated by federal agencies, particularly the FDA. So tell me a little bit about that and how that really fits into the overall mission of what you're doing at Elevated Wellness.
Absolutely. So I was lucky enough to come into contact with some medical professionals that wanted to get into the industry. I've been in the industry on and off for quite some time myself. So when I met these people, the USDA bill passed, it was kind of a no-brainer to kind of team up with them and utilize some of their resources to create extremely high quality products that are full panel tested for any impurities and so forth, and are manufactured in sterile USP 800 ISO 5 certified labs, which are technically pharmaceutical labs, which being with medical professionals, I have access to compounding pharmacies. And the compounding pharmacies we work within have a very heavy focus on natural alternatives. Chris Adlaka, who's actually the owner CEO, he had, prior to manufacturing cannabis with me, had a heavy focus on natural alternatives, working with different pain doctors, pain clinics, and so forth to formulate different topicals that could help people and maybe keep them away from certain prescription drugs as well that could be a little bit more harmful for them. Obviously, the goal is not to just completely switch people over or anything like that. If they need it, they need it. But at the same time, if we can provide them effective natural alternatives that have potentially less side effects, less habit forming issues and things of that nature, why not?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was kind of an eye opener when I met up with them and realized what resources they could provide me in formulating actual cannabis based products, in this case, hemp, being in Austin, Texas. And yeah, we've gone forward from this. And honestly, with some of my resources and theirs, we putting that all together, it's become really successful, and our products are substantial, effective, fully homogenized, again, full panel tested by third-party labs. We usually use ACS out in Florida, but we do utilize a few other labs as well, but it's always third-party lab tested, though we could do some testing in our facilities as well. That's just to show full transparency, right? And when I say full panel, I'm talking about testing not only potency or terpenes, but also monocytogens, mycotoxins, heavy metals, pesticides, residual solvents, you name it. So we want to kind of, the goal is creating a fail-safe environment for people, as well as effective and quality, even effect-based products.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a step back, Ross, and talk about you specifically. I mean, how long have you been in the industry? What's your relationship with cannabis? I mean, how did this all start, man?
So I kind of got into cannabis sort of my high school years. In all reality, I know a lot of us do, and I'm not advocating that necessarily, but it was a situation where it helped me in different ways, and then I started seeing it help the people around me as well. And then early on, I started growing cannabis, became a master grower, did that for roughly 13 and a half years before I started. And during that time, I actually did some extractions, concentrates, and things of that nature as well. And when I did that operation,
where was that? Was that in California where you were doing that?
So it started in California, but eventually went to other states and so forth, which maybe I shouldn't divulge. But at the same time, yeah, it's been in different areas. But I've lived all over the world, so I've had the opportunity to do multiple operations in different parts of the world.
Nice.
But also doing concentrates, extractions, and so forth. But for all the operations that I ran back in the day, we wouldn't let anything of harm pass. So if we found any areas of issues, whether it was pest infestation, mold, finding yeast, anything of that nature on our grows, we would actually do burn piles. We wouldn't pass that on by any means. So it was always kind of driving quality and kind of fail-safe products for people. So,
and you were practicing that early on, right? Before
yeah,
there
we were practicing
labs
very early on.
Yeah.
We were lucky enough to connect with some labs that were willing to work with us, even though some of them, were at that point in time kind of taking a risk. But yeah, it was all about transparency, and it was all about providing a product that we knew was safe and effective and so forth, and did a little bit of breeding and so forth as well. We had some pretty strong genetics as well as very prolific genetics, but I haven't grown probably in the last, I'd say, almost decade at this point. It's been more focused on formulation, different technologies of extraction and things of that nature, even like physics-based extractions that we're working on with another extraction company that we're sort of partnered with. So that's sort of been the focus since then. I also took a break to do a little bit of fine art reproduction and things of that nature, which is not involved in this industry. But the reason I did that was coming back to Austin for music purposes and, finding where and what I could do. And then, of course, the USDA bill passed, and that just opened it up to where I was like, well, I can stay in Austin, keep doing music, and then get back into the cannabis industry, which is my passion and love. Not only because I enjoy it, but also because I get to hear how it helps people, and it's not for everyone, but the many people that come back to me or us and give us praise for how it's helping them, that's makes it all worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you had to be in Texas, Austin's the best place for that. You're talking about music, fine art, and cannabis. I mean, that's the capital of all those three things. Exactly. Yeah. So tell me, I mean, so are you a musician also? What?
I am a musician. I started with guitar and bass, but quickly got into also doing electronic production and so forth, but more in the realm of like Brian Eno, Aphex Twin, Autiker, Boards of Canada, you name it. Still a little bit more underground, a little bit more glitch and so forth. But yeah, I'm fairly prolific and active in the music scene here in Austin, Texas. I'm actually recording an album right now in the Fast Horse studio. So that should be coming out early next year, which we're really excited about. But yeah, man, this current project is sort of electronic driven, but I got live drums, live vocals, and it's like walls of sound, a little bit glitchy and noisy, but drives a beat. Very unique. I can honestly say there's nothing out there that sounds like this current project.
That's beautiful, man. Is there a name for the album yet, so we can look out for it?
Or? Just a self-titled name, and the band is Auntie, Auntie. So it'll be Auntie for this release. It's going to be available on every digital platform, obviously, but it'll also come out on cassette with a download code.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I'm going to be definitely looking out for Auntie on Spotify, man. Shout out.
Yeah, bro, I appreciate that.
That's great. I mean, and what a natural fitting, right? I mean, because cannabis really promotes creativity, especially within the arts, right? Whether it be fine art, like you mentioned, or even music and creativity that way. So it seems like that's you found like a good trifecta within the city of Austin to really enjoy.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, tell me about, the process and what really goes into making a quality cannabis product in your mind. I mean, you've seen it all the way across the board, from genetics to cultivation to formulation, like you said. Is there anything within those roles that really stick out to you that you really enjoyed? And then again, overall, what makes a good quality product?
Yeah, so great question. I think every stage really matters in the process of making these products, even back to genetics, even the particular type of grow, not only how they're growing, but what they're growing. And then also, as far as your manufacturing, in our opinion, it makes a difference to manufacture with GMP sort of practices, right? You want actual quality manufacturing practices. So utilizing sterile labs where there's no risk of something either external from what you're putting into that product, getting into it and contaminating it, or even just having the ability to have access to all the correct equipment, software, and so forth to do the calculations properly and make it extremely consistent. But it goes from growing, extraction, to how you're actually putting that together, right? Like even our tinctures, we don't just put it on a spinning plate and heat, right? We go through ultrasonic homogenization, and we're never just taking a singular extraction. We're always sort of boosting that and adding to it, especially when we're trying to hit certain net of effects, right? So I guess the best way to say it is like no full spectrums technically created equal, right? Because it all depends on what went into that, right? Full spectrum could be mostly CBD and a little bit of THC and almost no minors, and you could still consider that full spectrum. And maybe because of the extraction method, there's no phenolic compounds, flavonoids, terpenes, and things of that nature, maybe no omegas, which honestly are beneficial in their own right, right? We all know terpenes are medicinal compounds as well. So some extraction methods actually won't pull that through. So making sure all those parts are there, and depending on what you're trying to actually hit in efficacy, all those parts matter. Like the genetic, right? What flower are you extracting from? What does that contain? You know, if it doesn't contain any like CBGA, CBDV, THCV, linalool, well, that's not going to be a very ideal strain for someone who's suffering from like epilepsy, Parkinson's, or some sort of spasmodic type condition, right? So it matters what that genetic has, what you're getting through via your extraction method, right? And what ends up in that product, because ultimately, as you know, with genetics of flower, they affect people differently. Right. And that's partially due to the fact that there's so many compounds in this plant and they vary genetic to genetic. So some of them are going to shine in certain areas and fall short in others, and vice versa, right? So making a quality product, all those things come into play. You know, it's all of it, especially depending on what you're trying to actually provide to that consumer, right? Or the patient that you're working with. And we work with doctors all over the nation, so we actually do get a lot of patients sent to us. So it matters to us to have a product that actually contains the right parts to provide them the relief they're looking for. You know what I mean? So I could sell a full spectrum product and just put full spectrum on there and just sell it as a general full spectrum product. But depending on what's in there, it may not help everyone with what they're dealing with. So that's why we do a lot of like terpene infusion, and we boost certain cannabinoids if needed, depending on the extractions. We use very high minored extractions. So more often than not, our extractions have roughly 20+% minors in them. And that's just to make sure that like once that's diluted into a product, you're getting enough milligrams of these particular minors to make a difference, right? So I would say all those things really matter, you know, manufacturing practices for sure, but even the starting material that you're working with, you know, like if the starting material has mold, yeast, heavy metals, you know, whether that's arsenic, cadmium, I don't know, you know, you're doing yourself a disfavor, and no matter what you do, that product's going to have a faulty nature, and it's going to cause issues with whoever's consuming it, right? And this is an inherent issue right now with products like this and within our industry, because we kind of have a lack of quality regulation, right? And quality regulation, as much as I don't want too extreme regulations like on sales and stuff, whether unless that's like an age limit or something like that, right? What I would like to see is someone getting behind, like just making sure that everyone's doing their due diligence to make a safe quality product, right? Because if you're consuming heavy metals, mycotoxins, monocytogens, you know, even solvents, there's so many issues that can come into play, whether that's your lungs, liver, kidneys, your blood, right? It could be as little as causing nausea, pain, and things like that, which you might be using it to reduce, right? Or it could get as extreme as to completely damage and have like liver and kidney failure. There's so many risks there if you're consuming a product that has these impurities and kind of dangerous chemicals that ultimately could end up in a cannabis-based product, right? I mean, you know, we see romaine lettuce come through sometimes, more often than not, with tons of salmonella, right? You consume that, right? You may love romaine lettuce and, you know, love what you make with it, but if it's just tainted with salmonella, that's going to cause you issues, right? And just like we, you know, pull that back, you know, and we say, hey, romaine lettuce right now has this issue, we're taking off the shelves and so forth. We're protecting people that way. But in the cannabis industry, we haven't gotten to that point yet. And for many reasons, it's, you know, been prohibited for how many decades. So we're kind of behind the times in that sense. But we would like someone to kind of step up, you know, whether that's the FDA or something, just to kind of push a little bit of quality regulation there. Just because I'm sure you've read, you know, the articles and the universities that have gone around and tested multiple products, and you're seeing the majority of them coming back with issues, whether that's plastics in there, heavy metals, pesticides like we're talking about.
And you're talking about universities that have the right to grow under under federal law, right? Like you're talking about those universities that are able to grow, or
the situations where like there's been universities and companies that have gone through and collected multiple brands of products and sent them off for third-party testing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And testing, and they're coming back and they're finding that the majority percentage there has all these issues.
Right.
Whether it's dangerous chemicals, impurities, or it's not what it's quoting to be, right?
Or doesn't have CBD at all, right?
Or at all, or it's fentanyl instead, you know what I mean? You never know. So in our minds, having some sort of quality regulation there and in place is just going to help the industry produce higher quality products, right? And safer products. And that's something that we do now, right? Because the way we see it is that it should be done. We should be taking the time and effort and spending that money to make sure whatever we're providing to these patients and customers is fail safe from any potential issue.
Right.
It's going to make it.
Okay, because I've heard this echoed quite a bit, especially living in Texas, right? Because I mean, one of my really good friends, Jesse Kearns, he's a lab owner in Texas, him and his brother, New Bloom Labs, right? And so
yeah, I know New Bloom.
So my question is like, is it a Texas problem where the lack of quality regulation, or is this across the board within the hemp industry, countrywide at this point after the 2018 Farm Bill? Are there states that are regulating themselves?
There are states that have started, and more often than not, you're seeing that in medicinal and recreational states. They're starting to require, like if you're growing cannabis, there's certain things you just have to test for before that hits the market, right? So there are states that are starting to do that, which is awesome. But Texas and a lot of states that just really haven't gotten on board yet just aren't enforcing things like that.
Right.
And that just leaves room for people to take advantage ultimately. And I'm not saying everybody is, right? That's not a claim I'm making. There's a lot of people doing really quality work, especially in Texas. There's some really big hitters here that are doing phenomenal work. And they are taking the effort and time to make sure it's of quality. But at the same time, you have so many players in the game, and a lot of them just aren't willing unless there's a bit of a forced hand. And that's partially due to the fact that it is really expensive, right? If you are doing all these tests and so forth, that does add up. And depending on resources and so forth, that may not be a realistic option for some people, right? So I do understand that, but because we have the resources we have, we utilize that because we think it's necessary, and we want to provide a quality and fail-safe environment for people. Ultimately, right. We feel that's really important, being that the majority of what we're manufacturing and how we're pushing our products is more in a medicinal way and a supplemental way and things of that nature. Right, less recreational, although we do have products that are enjoyed by what would be a recreational user, right? For sure. I mean, I'm not going to stray away from that whatsoever, but at the same time, our main focus is providing relief, right? So it just makes sense to have that in place somewhere, some shape or form.
Right.
But there are states that are kind of getting on board, but majority of them don't really have anything in place that says like, hey, you have to test for these things.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you're seeing as like Texas and other states are maturing, like, the players that are doing the same sorts of best practices or implementing those high standards, they're kind of flocking and probably gravitating toward each other, right? And growing, and that group's growing with each other and then the other actors are kind of doing the same. And I think we'll see over time, these groups kind of.
Oh yeah. It always takes time.
Right.
Yeah, it always takes time, but I think you're right. Like we are seeing a lot of people really doing the right thing. It's a potential risk right now as a consumer. You know what I mean? That's the main point is that if you're not, and that's why we just say, hey, you don't have to buy from us, but maybe do a little bit of due diligence and research the company you're purchasing from, and just make sure they're being transparent and honest and doing what they can to provide you a safe product. Right.
And that's what I tell people. Ask me, like friends or even like my sisters-in-law and their friends are like, Delta 8, what's the best brand? And I'll usually point them to the brands that I have used in Texas that I think are good, or I know the owners, right? What I do say is like the same thing. Do your research. I would probably steer away from like gas station type products, is what I'm sure that some brands slip in there, and that's good, but do your research first, basically, is the point. Know what and make sure those COAs are there. You can really see what's in the product.
And point with the gas station thing, I very much agree with you. Majority of what you're going to find in the gas station is not necessarily going to be that high of quality, and potentially has a higher risk to it. But we are like, we saw that, and we just saw it just getting flooded. And every time I went to a gas station, I, watching people buy a cake bar and this and that, you know what I mean? It's just like, all right. So we actually just recently started providing a few of our products to gas stations, just so they have something like extremely quality, transparent to provide their clients. As much as it was kind of a hard pill to swallow, you know what I mean? And it was a lot of back and forth within our team. It's like, I don't know about this. It came down to the fact that some of these people are looking for quality products, and they're going to gas station to get them. So if we can just hand them a few things, not everything, obviously, but a few things that would be marketable for them, that, obviously you have a huge QR code on there where you scan and you can see a full panel COA showing you the full transparency, what's in it and what's not in it, obviously. Why not? So we eventually kind of pulled the trigger on that, and it's a slow rollout, but we're kind of like trickling them in there and so forth. But, it's,
I commend you for doing that, because like you kind of alluded to, it's an opportunity to educate. And if they're gonna go in there and look, then to your point, slap that QR code in there and train the behavior to have these consumers that are shopping in gas stations look for that type of stuff, right? 100%. I mean, most people don't know what they don't know. And when you hear, hey, you should look into what you're buying. What's a COA? Oh, well, most products should, have a lab test where they show the panels of mycotoxins and heavy metals and pesticides, everything that you just talked about, right? So that's a learning opportunity there. I think that's great.
Big time. And education's key, right? Like not only in protecting the patient, user, consumer, but also in destigmatizing, right? Like education's key. Which is why we push education so much. When people come to us, we have free consultations in place. We have doctors, pharmacists on call if it ever has to come down to that, right? And talk about certain conditions, et cetera, et cetera. But we push education. And then when we're talking about products, we explain the products, why they are what they are, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not only for destigmatization, right? And an older couple comes in that's not sure about it, and they talk to me, I can make them feel a whole lot more comfortable. But it's not just the destigmatization part, but it's also protecting them going forward. So they do, just like you were saying, know what to look for. Right. So if they can't access us for whatever reason, shape, or form, they know what questions to ask, they know what to look for, et cetera, to where they can potentially have a better chance of finding a quality product that's going to still provide them the relief they're looking for.
Right. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I want to get back to, this is something that really fascinates me, Ross, and that was how you were talking about like the precision when it comes to the formulation process and how it starts with the genetics. And then once you understand the genetics and the profile of, say the material, the flower, then that informs what would be the best extraction method, right, to go about. And then from there, what's the best, formulation within that extraction. So, I mean, what are some of the extraction method processes that Elevated Wellness follows? And, what's your preferred method if there's one? And what are some strains that stick out to you? Yeah,
there's a few extractions that I have a heavier focus on. So I know supercritical CO2 is very, very popular, but you get a bit of loss with supercritical CO2. It's mainly because it only carries fat soluble chemicals. So any water soluble chemicals that are in that plant aren't actually going to get through. It'll only get in there if they're like reintroducing it, which a lot of people do. But even in
And is
that
it full spectrum at that point? Would it be
I mean,
considered?
technically via the industry's definition, right? But I wouldn't call it a whole plant extract, right? Or like a lossless extract. You are going to find some loss there, right? There's a lot that's not going to get through. The extraction methods we mostly focused on, one's known as more of like an advanced ethanol extraction, is very purified. There's no lipids, fatty acids, and so forth in there. You do get some of the omegas through, and you really get all the water soluble and fat soluble chemicals into that extraction. And being that it's fully purified, right, you're not going to have any issues there with any solvent residuals or anything of that nature. But you're getting more closely towards that whole plant extract with something using an organic advanced ethanol extraction. The other extractions I have a focus on are like rosin extractions. That's a solventless extraction. It's using pressure and heat ultimately. And you can actually get really good terpene profiles from that. Very, very lossless extractions. It's just the yield's going to be a little bit smaller in that sense, and that's fine. It's just producing a considerably higher quality extraction that doesn't touch a solvent, so you get a little bit more of a pure flavor and things of that nature as well. You're also going to get those omegas and things of that nature, which will help the efficacy also. And then, like I said before, we are working with a physics-based extraction. So this is no solvent, no heat involved whatsoever. It's ultimately creating force that strips the cellular wall away from that cell, and then they can pull everything out of that. So it is absolutely completely lossless extract, right? And no solvent touches it, much like rosin, right? But at the same time, it's no heat either. So some of those terpenes that wouldn't get through with a heat press, right, are getting through with this extraction method. So, because every chemical or compound in cannabis has a different boiling point, ultimately. Right. So, depending on the temperature that's produced, right, you could find loss there. This is something that has no temperature increase, no solvent whatsoever, and you literally get everything out of the plant completely lossless.
How does that work? Is that putting it in ice? Is that the whole?
No,
ice
it's a new technology. It's a machine. I believe they nicknamed it. Actually, I'm not even going to quote it because I'm probably going to butcher it. But it's like centrifugal force.
Wow.
In a sense, right? So it's completely physics-based extraction, where almost every other extraction method, other than something like rosin, is chemical-based.
Right.
Whether that's BHO, ethanol, CO2, et cetera, et cetera. It's a chemical-based extraction method. So this is one of the first times we're seeing this in the cannabis world. We actually just went through this extraction method to do these adaptogen blends with like chaseberry, black cohosh, you name it. We even are doing it with cannabis, obviously. And we're going to be doing a few other things with it as well that I'm really excited about, which I may not divulge just yet. And then there's another extraction method that I got my eyes on that I played around with a little bit. It's a spagyric extract. This is like an alchemist type of extract, right? Where you're getting the salts from the plant. And ultimately extremely high bioavailability, et cetera, et cetera. And one note I should make with the physics-based extraction, this is a really cool aspect to this. It's still a fat soluble chemical, right? You're not adding encapsulation, emulsion, surfactants, or anything like that, but it's coming out in nano and pico-sized particles. And this has now been actually confirmed by a university. They photographed it, and this is one of the first cannabis extractions that actually has pico-sized particles.
Okay, let's talk about pico-sized compared to nano-sized. What is
so it's like 100. It's it's what, a millionth of a nano, I believe. somewhere in that range.
Wow.
So it's considerably smaller than a nanoparticle, which, water soluble products mostly are quoting nano or micro or liposomal, right? But this is a completely, again, solventless, a heatless extraction, but it's coming out with nano and pico particles because of the force that's created.
Wow.
Right. And this has been confirmed by universities now. So we actually have photos of it, of confirmation of the pico particles and so forth, which ultimately means I can make a oil-based tincture that could match and exceed the bioavailability of a water soluble.
Wow. And that's just new technology that's kind of that universities are trying out.
Very new. It's a process that's been used for different purposes in the past, but this is very new to the cannabis industry. Extremely.
Wow. So that'll be something that'll be another method that you'll be testing out.
We're actually already implementing it. So
wow.
we are going to have products that are going to be hitting the shelves, and depending on like flavor profiles and things like that, we may even just boost the efficacy of particular products that we have currently as well, et cetera, et cetera. So we're working through that right now, but we've been working with these guys for the last, I'd say, near a year at this point. And so it's been close to a year working with them, communicating with them, going over all these different techniques and so forth and how we can accomplish it. And then only recently in the last 4 or 5 months did we start our extraction methods with it. So we got some cool stuff in the works for sure. Yeah.
That's really exciting. And it's actually a really good segue as we wrap up, Ross. I want to ask you, I mean, what is Elevated Wellness really focused on in the new year in 2023? And what are some of the the goals or milestones that you hope to achieve?
Yeah, well, part of our goal is destigmatization. So we continuously are pushing education and so forth. We do go out and speak, whether that's for legislative issues or just educational issues, going to like homes and so forth, speaking to the elderly, you name it. These are things that we hold very passionately. And then also going forward, we have basically with all these new methods of extractions and so forth, we are going to be coming out with some pretty cool products I'm really, really excited about, that are more geared towards like women's health, men's health, things of that nature. They're going to have all the right parts, all the right compounds to really, really make a difference and have an extreme bioavailability. And then on top of that, just making what we currently have even better if it's possible, you know what I mean? And then we're working on things like even I'm tempted to say this, but at the same time, it's going to be a process. So I would hate to give it up just yet. But we have some really cool things in the works that are going to be using like oral mucosal absorption and things like that, rather than like sublingual oral mucosal. It'll be nasal. I mean, you name it. So we got some pretty cool things coming that will, in our opinion, hopefully change the game a little bit, and give people more options rather than potentially smoking or inhalation and stuff that will maybe even match that efficacy or absorption rate as well as bioavailability. And then formulation, we're continuously tightening that up and coming out with new formulas that are a little bit more honed into specific issues, though we still make sure to have the right compounds in there to broaden that net and not just like hone it in completely on that particular issue. Like the good vibes you put up earlier, that I formulated that really to focus on stress-based issues, right? Mm-hmm. But because of its formula, it's also really great for inflammation pain because of the cannabidolic acid and the delta-8 boost. But the terpene profile in there is like super calming. It's like every terpene you could imagine that you would want in a product.
That's the effect I felt. Yeah. I mean, that's great.
That's the whole purpose, right? So we're going to be going forward with that as well, making products that kind of really advertise what it's best at, right? Again, to just be more transparent with people and a little bit more layman for them as well. But yeah, we got more edibles coming out. We're actually working on an entirely new brand as well, which I'm really excited about. It's called PI, like the scientific symbol, 3.14.
That's right.
So
3.14. I don't know all of the numbers after that.
2964. Yeah, exactly. So we got a few things in the works for sure right now that we're really excited about. We are working really closely with some medical professionals all over the nation, doctors and so forth, to again broaden the industry, as well as help destigmatize, on their end as well. So, when your friend says, oh, you should go try this, you might not be as willing, right? Depending on how close that friend is. But if your doctor's like, hey, go try this, right? You might be a little bit more prone to listening, especially if you have any sort of like adverse opinion to cannabis. So we are working with medical professionals to hopefully help destigmatize and then provide options to people that are getting more natural. So we got a few goals this year, for sure, mainly in formulation and product releases and so forth, but also in the realm of education and destigmatization.
Education, destigmatization, product innovations, new, extraction methods. It's a formulation. I mean, the list goes on and on. You guys are really busy come 2023, but I gotta tell you, I can't wait to try the game-changing men's health products that you talked about, because
really good.
a guy like me who lifts and works out, runs, gets inflammation,
Absolutely.
gets stressed. I mean, like everyone does, right? But I mean, these products really do really help, in those aspects. So
absolutely. Yeah, recovery is a big thing in the cannabis world.
Right. Yep. So I look forward to trying those out, Ross, once they're released. And yeah, man, this has been a great conversation. I've really learned a lot about the new extraction methods that are happening and what y'all are doing within Elevated Wellness. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
I would just say, if you're interested, come see us. If you want some education, go through a free consultation where we can kind of dig deep and kind of help you understand what would be best for you in the cannabis realm. Again, depending on the compounds in these products, it can differ, and there's going to be some that are going to be better than others, depending on what you're dealing with. So if you want to come in and say hi, I would love to talk and chat and educate. You can call us up. You can come to our brick and mortar here in the Triangle in Austin, Texas. More often than not, I'm around, but I'm also in the labs often as well. So, that's why I have employees here that are super educated as well and push education. And then again, anytime, if it gets too deep and it's something that someone doesn't fully understand, again, we have our doctors, pharmacists on call. So if you're looking for a place that's done its due diligence to create a fail-safe environment and a quality product and is pushing education and you want to learn, I would just say, come say hi, You
can see Ross for high quality cannabis and hemp products, and you can check out him live with his band. Is it Auntie?
Yeah, Auntie. You can say Auntie, however you want to pronounce it. You know what I mean? We say Auntie. And most likely going to be playing this New Year's Eve at the Little Darling down south in Austin. So if you want to come check it out and have a fun New Year's Eve, come see us.
Love it. Awesome, man. I'll be looking out for that album too.
Yeah. I'll be in touch. I'll let you know, brother. I'll send you one. How's that sound?
Hell yeah. That sounds great. I love it. Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate it again, Ross. Let's have you on again real soon, okay?
For sure, brother. And thank you so much for having me. I can't thank you enough. This was a great experience, brother. And good luck with your podcast. I love it. I love what you're doing.
Thank you so much, my man. It wouldn't be possible without you and other experts on. So
awesome.
Appreciate it. And thank you all for listening. Bye.
Take care, brother. This is a pleasure.